Welcome to the NFL Fantasy Football Show, presented by DraftKings. Here's your host, Marcus Grant.
What is up? Welcome to another edition of the NFL Fantasy Football Show, presented by DraftKings. It's me, your man MG, Marcus Grant, still masking and socially distancing when and where necessary. And we are in the beginning of Week 11. We've got a whole slew of games to get to. Michael F. Florio will join us, as he always does, on a Friday to talk about that. We will look at our best value fantasy daily picks of the week. We'll also ask our resident nerd, Matt Okada, about undrafted rookie free agents. We're giving James Robinsons of the world a little bit of love this week. We got plenty to talk about, including a Thursday night football game, which maybe wasn't what we thought it would be, but it had some interesting things to talk about that as well. But before we do any of that, we'll talk to our faithful producer, Senior Edward L. Murphy, Esquire. And Murph, I know we talk a lot about food before the show starts, and I know you and Florio were kind of talking some stuff. I just want to know, especially now that it looks like curfews are coming, that we're probably going to have to order more food, order out or what have you. Any new spots that you found in the LA metro area worth talking about?
Well, I don't know about new, but definitely one that actually we just mentioned to you guys before is this place Bonwi in Hollywood, and it's has like a Georgian dish called khachapuri, which is something I would never ever guess that I would be eating, but it's like a pizza almost is the best way to describe it, with like extra meat and like some kind of cheese sauce in the middle. It's just good bread, and it was like life changing. And now like people don't talk enough about Georgian food, and I would put that dish against anything I've ever had. I mean, I'm a huge barbecue guy, but this is just as good.
I'm down to try it. Like I always feel like it's great to sort of try, not just try new stuff, but new stuff in cultures or regions that you would never think, because I certainly would never have thought to try Georgian food. I will say that, one of my favorite restaurants in LA, and I know this is pretty much LA-centric talk, but there's a Himalayan place in Culver City, not too far from the NFL Network studios there, that has become a favorite place of mine. If you like Indian food, it's a very similar kind of style or feel to it, and it's great. It's worth checking out. And I guess that applies to everybody, wherever you live. Try something new. Try something you never had before.
Exactly.
It's pretty good.
Exactly.
And,
Get out of your bubble. Go try new stuff. There's stuff that's going to change your life. It's that good. And we are very lucky to be in LA with like some awesome places from every region of the world.
No doubt. And if you try something and you don't like it, you can always just fall back on peanut butter and jelly for the rest of the night and try again.
PB&J and grilled cheese, yeah.
Yeah, there's no shame in swinging and missing, but you never know. You might run into something that you really like. All right, let's turn our attention to our friend Michael F. Florio, who joins us every Friday on this show. And Florio, I know that you are on the lookout always for good spots to eat, new spots to eat, especially you being relatively new to Southern California. Have you found a place that you consider like a good go-to spot for you?
Yeah, so while you and Eddie were talking, thanks to both of you two, you guys have sent me places. I was writing all of those places down, like the Himalayan. My fiance loves Indian food, so I'll definitely take her there. My go-to, it's very unhealthy. I love Fat Sal's. It is a sandwich shop. There's one in West Hollywood. There's a couple of them. It's owned by the guy who plays Turtle in Entourage, but they just make the most unhealthy sandwiches with like French fries and mozzarella sticks on it and stuff. And it really reminds me of like a late night sandwich spot that I used to go to in New York. So I get that way too much, I would say.
It's funny you mentioned Fat Sal's, that you mentioned Turtle, Jerry Ferrara. I don't know if you saw this morning on Twitter. We have just recently passed the anniversary of the Malice at the Palace, when the Pistons and Pacers got in that brawl, and including fans. And the running joke has always been that there's some guy who looks like Turtle who got punched out by Ron Artest. And, so the tweets came around about Turtle getting knocked out by Ron Artest. And Jerry Ferrara actually had to respond to that on Twitter. I saw it this morning where he said, "I just want to reiterate, I was not the guy who was punched out by Ron Artest." He's like, "It happens every year." He's good-natured about it. He had fun. But, so that's, people have mistakenly thought Turtle got knocked out by an NBA player.
The guy dresses just like Turtle does on Entourage, too. He has like I know exactly who you're talking about. He has like the baggy jersey on and the backwards hat, and he looks just like him. So yeah, that is funny. As someone who has like a name with someone else who's kind of famous, I know what he goes through.
So, RIP to that guy. I don't think he's dead, but, good luck to that guy who actually did get knocked out by Ron Artest. And just remember that it is not actually Turtle from Entourage. Okay. Normally we start with the TNF recap, but we had some big fantasy headlines that jumped up on Friday morning that I think are worth starting the show with. The biggest of them, the one that has sent ripples through fantasy Twitter this morning. The Saints have announced that Taysom Hill is going to start at quarterback this week against the Atlanta Falcons. We were thinking all week long that this was going to be Jameis Winston starting. Certainly Taysom was going to play. He was going to have an expanded role, but we thought it was going to be Jameis under center. So now that it looks like Taysom Hill's getting the start, how much does this change your outlook for the Saints pass catchers in this game?
It changes it a whole lot, in my opinion. Like, Jameis Winston, you could say what you want about him. Yeah, he had the 30 interceptions last year. That's not great. But we at least know that he can get the job done as a quarterback at the NFL level. He led the NFL last year in passing yards by well over 200 yards. So he can throw the ball. We know that. And he has a different style that I was excited to see what this Saints offense will look like, because Drew Brees this year is averaging 5.4 air yards per throw, which is the bottom of the league. Jameis Winston last year was at 10.4, which only Matt Stafford was higher than. So I was really excited to see what Sean Payton may do with this offense, given he has a quarterback that you can now trust to throw the ball down the field. I thought it would be, the high volume pass attempts in what could be a high scoring game against Atlanta. Now I'm expecting the exact opposite. I'm expecting a whole lot of running. I expect Taysom Hill to have a lot of design runs. I expect Alvin Kamara and him to run the option at times. And I just think the throws are going to be short, safe throws, not really asking him to throw down the field or into tight windows. This guy has 18 career attempts in the NFL. He wasn't a good passer at college. And Marcus, I wish I could take credit for this, but at Roger tweeted this out, and it was sent to me right before the show by researcher Ben Nick Williams. Great stat. Taysom Hill is older than Brock Osweiler, who retired after an 8-year NFL career, but he has 55 fewer pass attempts than Jake Luton, who made his first NFL start 2 weeks ago. Like, how can we trust this guy to throw the ball?
We can't. That's the thing. I guess if there's somebody who maybe keeps a little bit of value, maybe it's Michael Thomas, just because you talk about those short throws and trying to avoid tight windows. That sort of, I feel like, tailors itself toward Michael Thomas. But this is going to be a situation where they are going to run the football a lot. I mean, you talk about that, right? They're going to run the option. They're going to run a lot of these RPOs. And we have seen, if there's anything, Taysom Hill seems like a guy who would have excelled like in the 30s, right? Where, the forward pass wasn't certainly as prevalent as it is today, where they still ran the football, where the quarterback was still very much involved in the running game. It just seems like he would have been that guy to be an excellent quarterback there. Here, it remains to be seen. And so I think there's going to be a lot of scheming, a lot of different looks for the Saints. But certainly if you were thinking about starting, certainly with Michael Thomas, I think if Emmanuel Sanders was on your list, maybe you're rethinking that a little bit right now. So then that begs the question, would you start Taysom Hill? I mean, what has to happen for you to really think about putting him in your lineup this week?
So I've been tinkering with the idea of where I want to rank him. As of right now, I have him in my top 15 because if he is going to be the starter and play the whole game, I think he's going to get a lot of opportunity to run the ball. I don't expect a whole lot of passing out of him, but can he give us, 150 passing yards, maybe a passing touchdown, which he hasn't really done in his NFL career, and then, close to something like 80, 90, 100 rushing yards? I think that is very much so in the range of possibility, and because of that, I have him inside my top 15, but then someone tweeted me and they were like, you have him right ahead of Brady. Can I really trust him over Tom Brady? And I was going back and forth like, there is the chance that he struggles and we do see more Winston than we expect. You don't really know with Sean Payton here. So I'm thinking now I'm going to lower him a little bit more because of the risk of starting Taysom Hill. But I do think his upside is someone that you can trust in fantasy because of his rushing floor.
That's the thing. The rushing floor sort of gives him at least a little bit of stability here, but it is going to be hard to figure out how to rank him. And Look, I know the game isn't until Sunday, so there's still a couple more days for us to sort of turn this over in our heads and figure it out. Look, I know that on some platforms, and I was asked about this yesterday on a different show, some platforms allow you to play him at tight end, which if you grabbed him with that purpose, then you are probably actually set up really well, because now you essentially have a 2-quarterback lineup by playing Taysom Hill at tight end. There's a whole other rant I could go on about whether or not this is good or ethical or right or what have you, but we'll save that for another time.
This is why he should not be a tight end.
Right.
Like, that's my takeaway.
No, I think that's probably the short answer to this. Yes, he shouldn't be a tight end because he is not a tight end. He's just a guy they use in different spots. But look, I always said that this is the week. If you have tight end eligibility, this was probably the week you could try it. Now all of a sudden you have backed yourself into having a 2-quarterback lineup. So bully for you. Look, sometimes you take advantage of loopholes. There's really nothing else to say about that. On the flip side, a lot of people made a lot of waiver wire moves, spent some of their fab budget, dropped players, did a lot of reorganizing to get Jameis Winston on their roster, and now it's sad trombone music for them this morning. You are one of those people, so I'm just going to ask you. I mean, what are you doing? How are you coping with this?
So first of all, I was very angry this morning when I saw it, because in my biggest, my favorite league, it's a super flex league, and my quarterbacks this year were Josh Allen and Gardner Minshew, and everyone rosters multiple quarterbacks, so getting one off the waiver wire has been tough. So I've just been riding with one quarterback in that league, and then Winston came up, and with Allen on bye, I spent literally all 10 of the fab dollars I had left to get him, and I felt really good about it. And then I woke up this morning and saw that he was not starting. I think there's obviously no way you could trust him, even though I wouldn't be surprised if Taysom Hill gets off to a slow start. If we end up seeing a good amount of Winston this week, you can't rely on that, I don't think. So I think you just got to get him out of your starting lineup. In a 1-quarterback league, I think you can drop him. But in a 2-quarterback league or a super flex league, I'm going to be a little bit patient, because we do expect Breeze to miss multiple weeks. And again, I am not sold on Taysom Hill as a passer. I think this can go very wrong for Sean Payton and the Saints. And if it does, then I think we can get Jameis Winston as soon as next week.
I do think that point you made about Breeze being out a couple of weeks is an important one that folks should pay attention to. So if whatever happens this week, don't necessarily bail on Jameis right away just because we know Breeze is going to still miss some time. So there's still some value there. The other part of this, and you sort of touched on it, is I feel like the worst possible scenario, and I feel like it's completely within the realm of possibilities of Sean Payton, is that Taysom Hill does start. He comes in, he plays the first series or two, and then we see Jameis for most of the game. And I know that there will be a lot of fantasy managers who will be heated if that's the case. If Taysom Hill really does start, but the plan is still for Jameis to come in and throw the ball 30 times and put up, 280, 300 yards, there will be a lot of people who are heated, and it wouldn't surprise me one little bit if that is what Sean Payton decided to do. Because, look, as I said this morning on Twitter, most coaches don't really care about fantasy. They are not paying attention to what we're talking about. If anything, we're more of an annoyance to them. I do think Sean Payton actively tries to troll fantasy managers, and this would be the ultimate troll on fantasy managers to do this with Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston. Other big news for fantasy is DeAndre Swift suddenly popped up on Thursday in the concussion protocol, something that must have happened during practice during the week, because there was certainly no indication of it after last week's games, and is in very real danger of missing this week's game against Carolina, which is a fantastic matchup for him, especially having just really taken over a huge role in that backfield. So if Swift can't go, do we pivot to Adrian Peterson, and how much do you trust that this week?
Yeah, I am someone who has a good amount of DeAndre Swift this year, and I'm very sad because I had him ranked as a top 10 running back in what I thought was a smash matchup. If he sits, I think AP is then a RB2 because of the matchup and because of the volume that I expect to go his way. But I also think Kerryon Johnson will get involved. Even as much as DeAndre Swift has been playing really well, they don't just use one running back here. They continue to mix in a second, sometimes even a third back. So I think AP becomes an RB2, and I think Carry-On becomes more of a deeper flex option. But I'll say this, like I was saying on Fantasy Bites yesterday, like I'm trying to trade for DeAndre Swift before the trade deadline, which is today. I think that the fact that DeAndre Swift has his concussion right now maybe only lowers his asking price. I would still be trying to trade for him. He has a great schedule coming up and in the fantasy playoffs. And if someone is fighting for their playoff life and has DeAndre Swift, they need to win this week. So I think you could actually maybe even get him for a little bit cheaper then.
I have been a huge proponent of trying to add DeAndre Swift in any leagues because of what you mentioned. The playoff schedule is great, and he is taking over that big role at the right time. So let's hope that everything's okay. We'll see what happens with him this week, but hopefully long-term, this isn't a lingering issue and he's able to get back on the field. And for fantasy, I think it would be the right time to get him back in your lineup when and where possible. And at least in this situation, it does look like Peterson seems to be a fairly easy swap just because of the way the roles work. But yeah, you're right. Kerryon Johnson's going to be in there as well, but I think Peterson probably takes the lead as the runner in that backfield. Okay, now let's turn to Thursday Night Football, a game between the Seahawks and the Cardinals at the newly renamed Lumen Field, the artist formerly known as CenturyLink. All I know is that when I think of Lumen, I think of Julia Stiles' character from the 5th season of Dexter, which is about when the show went downhill. I hope that doesn't have any correlation to the Seahawks season. It's just a random thing that I mentioned. But Seattle does come out of there with a 28-21 win in a game that wasn't maybe as high scoring or didn't have as many fireworks as we had anticipated. But a few of the top scorers, Tyler Lockett ended up with 21 points in that one. Kyler Murray gave you just over 20, although it was his lowest scoring game of the season, just 20.26. So I guess you could say what's wrong with Kyler Murray in some weird way. I don't know. And then Russell Wilson bouncing back from his 9 points last week to give you just over 20 as well. Didn't get to 200 passing yards, but did have a pair of touchdown passes. The one thing, though, DK Metcalf did have a touchdown, but really didn't do much in the way of yards. Probably should have had a second touchdown, but it bounced right off of his face mask in the back of the end zone. But this is 2 weeks in a row, Florio, that Metcalf has not put up big numbers for you. Is there something to worry about, or is this just that he happened to run up on two of the elite corners in the league in back-to-back weeks?
I'm not worried about DK. I think last night, he didn't have a huge fantasy day, but he easily could have. There was so many fantasy points that he left on the field. He had the one drop in the end zone where he had a lot of fun with it. The ball, he's open in the end zone. Russell hits him. The ball hits him in the face, and he drops it. And he joked after the game and then put it even on Twitter, Russell Wilson owes me an apology for that fastball. And he even said after the game, he was like, Russ told me that's probably the hardest ball he's ever thrown in the NFL. So, he was having fun with it. There was that one. He had a bad drop where he was open across the middle of the field and had some room to run after. And then he had a 41-yard catch on Patrick Peterson that was called back due to holding by the center. So if any one of those are caught, we're really not panicking about DK Metcalf. And he's just been so consistent outside of, he's had 2 games with really, I think 2 games where you're like, all right, I want more. Because even last night, he scored a touchdown. He gave you adequate fantasy points. So I'm not worried about DK.
I think that's probably fair. The long catch was one that one hurts a lot. The drop, the touchdown off the face mask in the back of the end zone. And it's funny that Russ says that's the hardest ball he's ever thrown, because watching it live, I'm like, that was a missile. I mean, that was an absolute cannon shot that he fired back there, which sort of tells you how hard he threw it, that it caught DK by surprise and smashed him in the face. But I think you're right. And last night we've been waiting for both Seahawks receivers to put up decent games at the same time. And I think in some respects you did. You got, 13 points, I think, out of DK Metcalf. You got the 21 points out of Tyler Lockett. So for the first time this year, I feel like both those guys sort of worked fairly well in tandem with one another. And look, even with 2 less than great weeks, you're not freaking out. You're not sitting DK Metcalf. You're not panic trading him away. Although if you want to panic trade him away to me, I will gladly accept before the day is out. Send him over. If you're really worried about him, I will take DK Metcalf off your hands. We kind of saw split work between Chase Edmonds and Kenyon Drake last night. And I know a lot of people who started Chase Edmonds were sort of concerned about how things were going until a blown coverage left him wide open in the back of the end zone and he caught his touchdown. But have we learned anything more? Do we have any more clarity into the Cardinals backfield after what we saw yesterday?
No is like the short answer. They both played 51 and 52% of the snaps. They both split passing down work. I guess the one thing we could take away is that Kenyon Drake is still clearly the early down back, and he is going to get a lot of the groundwork there. And more importantly, he is going to get the goal line opportunities when Kyler Murray doesn't keep them and run it in for himself, because he has 10 rushing touchdowns right now. That's like Dalvin Cook level. But I think it is Kenyon Drake as more of a RB2 now, and maybe Edmonds is more of a flex option. And I started Edmonds over Drake yesterday, so I was worried until he caught this touchdown right here, he was so open he could have signaled for a fair catch if he really wanted to. But I don't think we learned a whole lot other than it's going to be Drake on the ground and Edmonds is going to get mixed in as well.
This has turned into it's a running back committee, basically. I mean, and I think we're going to see both of these guys used equally going forward. I mean, here's the thing. I think if we felt like this was going to be this way at the beginning of the year, I don't think we'd feel so bad about Kenyon Drake. But the way they used Drake last year, where he was playing, 80 to 85% of the snaps on a weekly basis, he was dominating the touches. That's what led certainly me, and I think a lot of other people, to believe that a big year was coming for Kenyon Drake. If what we saw last year was kind of a 50-50 split where, you sort of had, look, let's just say, for comparison's sake, maybe a Joe Mixon, Gio Bernard type situation there, right? I think that's what we would have expected, and what we've seen out of Drake wouldn't be so heartbreaking. But, here we are 11 weeks in. I think we've settled into something, and I think this is kind of what we can expect from the Cardinals going forward. If so, you just readjust your expectations. I know you probably spent a high draft pick on Kenyon Drake, and you didn't do that to get an RB2, but this is where we are now. So with just a handful of weeks left in the regular season, I think we adjust and we make the most of it going forward. All right, well, going forward from here, today's show is sponsored by DraftKings, the leader in one-day fantasy sports. DraftKings has millions of dollars in total prizes up for grabs this week. So download the DraftKings app now. Use code TEAM during sign-up and start feeling the sweat like never before. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details. We'll come back and talk about some of our big questions into Week 11, including what are we doing about Hollywood Brown? Stay tuned for that and more on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. Salute to Service is the NFL's year-round effort to honor, empower, and connect with our nation's service members, veterans, and their families through long-standing partnerships that support our military community. The NFL, its clubs, and players thank all of our armed forces serving in the United States and around the world. Join the NFL in Salute to Service by visiting NFL.com/salute. Time to look at some of our big questions as we head fully into Week 11. And Teddy Bridgewater looks like he is unlikely to start. He's dealing with a knee injury, and I know he's sort of tried to work it out, but it doesn't look like he's going to be able to go against the Lions. So now how are you feeling if it ends up being, say, PJ Walker or Will Grier? How do you feel about Robbie Anderson and the rest of those pass catchers in Carolina?
Not nearly as good. Like, Teddy, I had hope early in the week when he got in that limited practice and it sounded like he was going to play, but now it really sounds like he is not. And even with Teddy healthy, these wide receivers here, like early on in the year, Robbie Anderson was looking like a must start each week, but he has really come back down to earth. DJ Moore, I know he had a good game last week, and every time he has a good game, fantasy Twitter loves to highlight how talented he is and how good he is. But for fantasy purposes, he's a boomer bust wide receiver 3, in my opinion. He has single-digit fantasy points in half his games this year. So I think, again, and with this being a game that the Lions are so banged up on offense and so weak against the run, I think they can just rely heavily on Mike Davis this week. So to me, Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore are both just, you're hoping that they hit on a long pass or something, but they're very, high floor, but low floor, but high ceiling plays. I think Mike Davis is the one player here that I'm definitely starting. And outside of that, it depends on options.
Which is really encouraging, because I know that for folks who have been rolling with Mike Davis the last few weeks, I mean, he had that really hot start, and then he sort of came back to earth after that, which probably is a reminder of why the Panthers, keep running. Look, Mike Davis is great, but he's probably better in short bursts as opposed to kind of a long-term option. But this does seem like it sets up for him to get the ball quite a bit. I also wonder if this maybe could end up being good for Curtis Samuel, who we've seen as that Swiss Army knife. We've seen him get the ball as a runner. We know they can throw him the football if they need to. So maybe this sort of injects a little bit of juice into Curtis Samuel as well. But DJ Moore has been so up and down that it's certainly hard to trust with a backup quarterback. Robbie Anderson, after a quick start, has been just okay. Nothing really great. So he's another one that I would worry about. But I think you're onto something with the whole Mike Davis thing there. Other wide receiver talk here. It has not been the year we would have expected for Marquise Hollywood Brown. He's been okay. Certainly not worth what you probably got, what you spent on him in draft capital. But he's got a good matchup this week. He has a really good schedule, Mike, and that's the frustrating part to me. The schedule's really good, but I just worry about the production. How many more chances do we give him before we just pull the plug?
For the first time all year, Marcus, I had him as a player you can drop if you're in need of, picking someone up off the waiver wire to get in your lineup or anything this week, because like you said, like the opportunity has been there. You see right there, 23% target share. He's always towards the top of the league in targets of 20 plus air yards. But my issue is that's really all they've been using him as, is a deep threat. And Lamar hasn't been able to connect with him. You're seeing here all the times that he's getting overthrown on these deep passes. What I was expecting coming into the year was a lot more. Yes, I expected a lot of deep shots, but I expected them to, do some like wide receiver, like end arounds or get him the ball, get creative with him and get him the ball, short, safe passes where he can then use his speed to pick up yards after the catch. And they're simply not using him in that role. I get it. The schedule is great. And if you are a team where you have your starting wide receivers filled out, and like I have a team where I've already clinched the playoffs. I'm good at starting wide receiver. I'm keeping him on the bench just in case he comes to life and can take advantage of this really favorable schedule. But like if you're someone who needs that spot because there's tons of injuries and tons of players on bye now, I do not think you have to keep holding him.
Yeah, it's just been hard, and what you talked about with him being a deep threat. I mean, I was talking to our pal and wide receiver whisperer, Matt Harmon, and he basically said the same thing, that they're just using him as a deep threat, that they haven't diversified what they're using him with. Not, no slants, no screens, nothing to just get the ball in his hands and let him make plays. And so because Lamar is struggling on the deep ball, it just hasn't worked out. He hasn't had more than 60 yards receiving in a game since week 5. And you look at that schedule, it's so tantalizing, right? Because they have the Titans this week. Then there's the Steelers, the Cowboys are on the roster, or on the schedule rather, the Jaguars, the Giants in the playoffs. So it feels like it should be great, but nothing I have seen about the Ravens passing game suggests that this is going to be anything other than the continual disappointment that we have seen all year. So I get if you're scrambling, you want to drop him. I have no beef with that. I also understand if like Florio, you're holding on to him, hoping that something comes to life. But at this point, I'm skeptical that we're going to see anything of any real consistent value production-wise from Marquise Brown, and that is frustrating. Speaking of frustrating, let's talk about the Colts backfield. We know Nyheim Hines, I think, has a role here. In fact, he's the guy that it seems like fantasy Twitter as a whole is touting in this week's game against Green Bay. But Jonathan Taylor, Jordan Wilkins, they're still going to get some snaps. They're still going to get some opportunities in this one. So leaving Hines out of the equation, if you had to pick between Taylor and Wilkins, which one are you going with this week?
Yeah, maybe it's just because I am a sucker for Jonathan Taylor. I liked him coming into the year. I liked him coming off the bye. And each time I go back for more, I just get let down. And I don't know why I keep going back for more, But here I am saying Jonathan Taylor once again. Last week, it was the Nyheim Hines show, but we did see Taylor play 25% of the snaps to Wilkins 20. It was 7 carries for Taylor, 8 for Wilkins, 2 targets Taylor, 1 for Wilkins. So they basically split the same amount of work. But I do just think that if Jonathan Taylor, they seem to give him shots early on in games, and then he somehow messes it up and gets taken off the field. If he can take advantage of a good matchup, I think that Frank Reich and the Colts will showcase their rookie a little bit. I have no confidence in him. Don't take this as me saying like you should start him, but I do think, Marcus, that like you said, fantasy Twitter is hyping up Nyheim Hines. It is a really good matchup. And last week, fantasy Twitter kind of washed their hands with Jonathan Taylor. Doesn't this feel like that'll be the week now that Jonathan Taylor shows some life and sucks everyone back in?
It absolutely does. And that's why I'm afraid that, look, I'm riding with Jordan Wilkins in this one, but I am afraid that Taylor does come to life this week. And I'm with you. I don't have extreme confidence in either one of these guys. And maybe this is recency bias talking, because I was a big Jonathan Taylor fan coming out of Wisconsin. I thought, I know that the debate was between he and DeAndre Swift for the best overall prospect, and I was on the Taylor side of that. So far, it hasn't worked out after, not quite one full season. I will say that, recently it looks like Wilkins has been the more efficient, the better runner than Jonathan Taylor. But I will also admit to the fact that, it's not like he has been light years better. I mean, neither one of these guys has been great, which is why we saw Nyheim Hines step in and get so many opportunities last week. So it could turn either way. I say Wilkins this week. It could very easily be Taylor if he protects the football, if he hits a couple of holes and has a couple of nice runs. This is a week for one of these guys to sort of get healthy, because the Packer run defense has been lacking, and especially near the goal line. They've given up 11 rushing touchdowns, which is among the highest in the league. So there's a chance for one or both of these guys to really excel this week. We'll see who it is. We could be talking about this next week, and it was neither, and it was still the Nyheim Hines show. So who really knows? If you want more stuff like this, of course, you can check out myself, Michael F. Florio, Kimmy Checks, and Adam Rank on NFL Fantasy Game Day. That is Sundays, starting at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and then all the other corresponding times elsewhere on the map, wherever you live. You can find it at NFL.com, on the NFL apps, and at YouTube.com/NFL Fantasy Football, and it's on YouTube. You can find Florio usually answering as many questions as he possibly can up until about 15 minutes or so before kickoff. We will take a break and come back with our best value daily fantasy picks for the week. See where we're going at quarterback. I suspect that, be a name that maybe we've talked about a little bit on this show. Stay tuned for that on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. It's time for Best Value, presented by DraftKings. Every week about this time, we try to get you the most bang for your fantasy buck by putting together some of the best values we can find for your daily fantasy lineup. Now, at the start of the show, we talked about the big news out of New Orleans. And Florio, I know you said you had to sort of make some changes in some of your season-long lineups because of that. And I would imagine you had to sort of make similar pivots in some of your daily lineups as well.
Yeah, I had to make a whole bunch of pivots this morning when the Saints announced that Taysom Hill will be starting, and one of which was here for the DFS value. I was all set to talk about Winston and the great matchup, but instead I'm going to go with Taysom Hill here. He costs less than $5,000, and anytime I think you could get a starting quarterback for this cheap, especially one that I know there's risk involved with Taysom Hill, but like you're seeing right there, he can run. And that's a lot. There's a lot of value to that in fantasy football, especially that they use him near the goal line as well sometimes. So I think at just such a cheap price, it allows you to get a lot of higher end options at other positions that he's worth taking a shot on, especially in like a tournament contest.
This is, I think, the time, because obviously the salary hasn't caught up to what potential Taysom Hill might have this week fantasy-wise. So this is certainly a great spot to get him at. I'm going to go with Alex Smith, who made his return to starting last week and threw for nearly 400 yards. The only drawback was that he didn't have a touchdown. I think he has at least one touchdown in this game against the Bengals. Maybe the yardage won't be quite there, but he'll make up with it by getting the ball in the end zone at least once or twice. And at 5,300, this does give you a lot of flexibility to go big at some other places on your roster. I know he's not the guy who runs, quite a bit as he did early in his career, but who knows? Maybe he gets out of the pocket and scrambles a couple times too to get you some nice rushing yards. Running back, where are you looking for your value this week?
I'm gonna stick with Alex Smith, but I'm gonna go with the running back here for Smith. I'm gonna go with Antonio Gibson at 5,800. I know it's not a huge value, but I think that speaking about the running back position this week, there's slim pickings, and I really like the matchup for him. The Bengals give up a ton of rushing yards to running backs. They're in the top 5 in that. They give up a lot of fantasy points as well. And one thing we've seen recently is that Alex Smith loves to dump it off to his running backs. So I think Gibson could even get you a couple of catches, and he is clearly their goal line back. So I like his opportunity of scoring a touchdown this week as well.
I like Gibson a lot. I also like Damian Harris this week for New England. The way he has run the football this year really makes me think that Sony Michel just isn't going to have a role whenever he's healthy and back. And I know he can come back pretty much at any time now. But Harris has been very effective running the football. 4 games with over 100 yards, and even the games where he hasn't hit 100 yards, has played very well there. The only drawback is that he hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns, but I think that can change this week against the Houston Texans, who have one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. This, I think, in a lot of ways, is a good week to get Patriots in your lineup, whether it is Harris, Jacoby Myers, Cam Newton, what have you, because the Texans just are really weak defensively. But I do like Damian Harris as a value running back pick. Over to wide receiver. I saw the name when you filled this out. I saw this and was very, very excited because I think this is a nice pick at wide receiver this week.
Thank you. That makes me feel even better about it. I'm going with Jalen Reagor here. At 4,300, not a whole lot to pay for him. I think you can get him as a wide receiver 3 and then pay up for a couple of nicer options. But last week, I liked him a lot, and he didn't really come through. But the targets, career high is 7 targets. That is trending up. He is clearly also their down the field threat. He is so fast and can create so much separation. The only issue is, can Carson Wentz hit him? And the Browns are a good matchup. They allow a lot of fantasy points to wide receivers that I think if you're going a little bit deeper, Jalen Reagor is a high upside name that I like a lot this week.
The Browns have really struggled with slot receivers as well, and Reagor doesn't play exclusively there. They like to move him around, but if they can get some really good matchups in the slot, I do think they'll take some shots down the field. All right, so I felt a lot better about this Emmanuel Sanders call before I woke up this morning, but I do still think there is a path there. We talked about Taysom Hill and whether or not he's going to put the ball and throw the ball downfield, but I do think they may try to take a couple of shots, sort of medium deep, some of those intermediate throws with Sanders. And I still like the fact that the matchup on paper is very good. If he can get open and they can find ways to get the football in his hands, maybe he finds his way into the end zone. Like I said, I felt a lot better about it when I thought it was Jameis throwing YOLO balls down the field, but I do think there's a chance for Sanders to still get some targets and make some plays in this offense. We are of one mind about tight end, and it's weird that we're talking about so many players from the Washington football team this week.
It really is. We both like Logan Thomas. And Marcus, remember early in the year where he had like a great matchup every single week and we'd be like, all right, he's a sleeper, and he just didn't do anything with it? He's made up for it as of late. In 3 of his last 4 games, he is double-digit fantasy points, and I know that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but that was enough for him to finish as a top 10 tight end in all 3 of those weeks. It's the state of tight end this year. If you can get 10 fantasy points, you are probably going to be a top 10 option. And given the matchup, the Bengals allow the second most fantasy points to tight ends, and that he's been playing well, I think for 3,300 to get a potential top 10 tight end is a really good value.
I joked earlier in the year that it felt like he was basically just getting his steps in out there on the field, because it seemed like the number of snaps he played was great. The number of routes he was running seemed great, but for whatever reason, they just weren't targeting him. And that has changed the last few weeks. So that makes me feel a little bit better about Logan Thomas. And look, we're at a point where if you can get, say, 4 catches for 40 yards and a touchdown, what is that, 14 points basically? Like, you can be a top 5 tight end in any given week. I mean, there's going to be Travis Kelce at the top and then everybody else sort of behind him. So I think you can get that much out of Logan Thomas this week against the Bengals. And again, 4 for 40 and a touchdown. That's probably a top 5 tight end finish, depending on how everything works out around him. Defensively, where are you going for your value defense this week?
I know we like to joke that you could just stream against the New York teams each and every week, and you can, but another team, a sneaky team that I think you could stream against every week is the Eagles. They allow nearly 4 sacks per game. That's the most in the league. They're allowing the 3rd most giveaways per game. And what I really like about them is for fantasy purposes, they've allowed the opposing defense to finish as a top 10 fantasy defense in 7 of their 9 games this year. So I know the Browns at 3,000 aren't super cheap, but I think you'll get nice production out of them, and they're also not a defense that you really need to pay a high price to get.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago on Fantasy Live, I actually said the Browns might be a nice, sneaky defense to help you get into and through the playoffs because they got Philly, they've got Jacksonville, and they do have the 2 New York teams in weeks 15 and 16. I'm going to go and just keep this whole theme going in Washington with the Washington football team defense. And we know that the Bengals want to throw the football a lot. That has been their MO this year, partially because they're playing from behind. But part of the reason I like Washington this week is because they are going to get pressure on the quarterback. And Joe Burrow has been hit as much as anybody. He's been sacked 32 times, which I think is the 3rd most in the league this year. So he has constantly faced pressure. He did not face pressure like this at all at LSU. And I don't care how good you are. If you continually have guys in your face, if you are continually getting hit, it is only natural to start to want to get the ball out quicker, to just kind of make some throws and maybe rush yourself into some bad throws here. So if Washington can stay in Burrow's face, if they can get him pressured, get him rattled a little bit, not only can they get sacks, but I think there's the opportunity for them to get some turnovers as well. And at 2,900, it's definitely worth taking the shot on. There you go. That was Best Values presented by DraftKings. When we come back, we'll take a look in the best of our pack and figure out what we're doing with Chase Claypool. And maybe has he risen up the ranks there in Pittsburgh. Stay tuned for more of the NFL Fantasy Football Show. Let's find the best of the pack presented by Panini Trading Cards, shall we? We always pull 3 out of a pack and kind of kick it around a little bit. So we will start talking a lot of Saints today. But Michael Thomas with the New Orleans Saints. I mean, we didn't anticipate talking this much about the Saints when we put this show together yesterday. But, you know, sometimes things happen. Obviously, Thomas missed a good portion of this season because of injury. But even when he's been on the field, Florio, his production has not been great. And maybe this week is something of an anomaly as we figure out what happens with the quarterback position. But overall, how worried should we be about his lack of production this year?
I know it's easy to say, like, don't be worried. He's Michael Thomas. This is, still the Saints offense. He's going to be okay. And I think long term, that is the answer. But right now, in this season, in 2020, I think you should be very worried. Like, if you drafted Michael Thomas, your season is probably over already. You got a half a game out of him in week 1 and then didn't get him again until recently. And in the 2 games you've had him, he's given you less than 10 points and barely over 10 points. So you're not getting the wide receiver 1 numbers that you paid for him. And now you have to worry about Taysom Hill starting, not even Jameis Winston. So I think right now, if you have Michael Thomas in 2020, if your season is still alive, rejoice, because you had to do something to save it. But I'm worried because he is not being productive. I'm not worried about 2021 or anything long term, but for this year right now, I'm worried.
I'm very worried. 10 catches for 95 yards for the season. I mean, that was like a game. That was 3/4 of a game for him last year at times. I mean, because of the way they were using him. But I do think that maybe he has some other games that are better. Maybe he has a 100-yard game at some point. But the idea that you're going to see the Michael Thomas you expected when you spent a top 5, maybe even a top 3 overall pick on him, I think those expectations have sailed at this point. And it is really a conundrum. Like, you feel like you can't leave him on your bench because of what his potential is, but at the same time, when you have him in your starting lineup, he has been killing you so far this season. All right, next. Another wide receiver, Chase Claypool of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And obviously, he burst on the scene early in the year. He had a 40-point game, scored 4 touchdowns. But for the most part, his production has been fairly steady, and his floor has been fairly good. And by the count of fantasy points, he is the highest scoring wideout in the Steelers offense. Does this mean he is the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh, though?
He is not, in my opinion. I know he's been playing really well. I think that all 3 of them are actually viable in fantasy, especially with how much they've been passing as of late. But I like to joke that Deontay Johnson doesn't always finish games, but when he does, he finishes with double-digit targets. And I think that he is the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh because it just showed, like, every time this guy stays healthy and can actually finish a game, he is going to be very productive. And again, he is likely going to be leading them in targets. So for me, I have him as their wide receiver 1, but I think Claypool and Juju are battling it out for wide receiver 2 there. And I think all 3 of them are fantasy viable. Like, they're all in my top 24 this week.
I think that is, for me, I think maybe the bigger battle. I mean, I sort of asked the question about him being the number 1 receiver. I kind of figured it was going to be, your answer was going to be Deontay Johnson. But I do think there's a real battle for number 2 between Claypool and Juju. And especially because Juju has come to life in the last month or so. It was a rough start to the season for him, but you look at what he's done over the last 4 weeks, looking at his totals here. I mean, last week was 22, the week before 21, 13, 17. So Juju is starting to look like the guy we thought he could be when we were having our drafts and we were taking him in, say, the 3rd or 4th round. The hope was that a healthy Ben Roethlisberger would bring him back to life. That's happened. But Chase Claypool's not going anywhere, guys. He's still getting plenty of targets. I think, frustratingly, if you have James Conner, Chase Claypool has been getting a lot of looks down near the goal line. They have given him some runs on jet sweeps. They have thrown him the football. That's great if you got Claypool, not so much if you've got James Conner. And maybe the biggest takeaway from this is that the Steelers are really good at evaluating wide receiver talent. And they're also good not only at evaluating it, but figuring out how to use it to their best advantage, because they just keep rolling guys through from Mike Wallace to Antonio Brown to Juju to Deontay Johnson to Chase Claypool. So the next time the Steelers draft a wide receiver, let's pay attention to it. maybe there's something there. All right, last one.
To that point, Marcus, Juju is a free agent at the end of this year. If they let him walk, just for those in keeper or dynasty leagues, Claypool and Deontay's arrow could really be pointing up heading into 2021, unless they go out and they draft the next Chase Claypool, of course.
Of course, right? Until they draft somebody else, and then Chase Claypool is battling for targets with whoever that other person is. Also, will be interesting to see where Juju lands, because I still think he has a lot left in the tank, and if he can go to a situation where maybe he's not fighting for targets as much, very curious to see what his upside could be. All right, last one, staying in the division. It is Sir Nicholas Chubb. He of the running out of bounds at the 1 yard line and breaking a lot of fantasy football hearts, but still a guy who is going to have, I think, a very good end of his season, which begs the question, what do you see as his ceiling for the rest of the year?
I think his ceiling is top 5 running back, and I thought his ceiling was that coming into this year as well. We know how good of a runner he is. We know the Browns want to rely on these 2 running backs. Like, any game that the Browns don't have to throw the ball in, if they're playing with a lead or it's a close contested game, they're going to be riding Chubb and Hunt. So I think both of them are fantasy viable the rest of the way. The only concern I have with Nick Chubb is I think his ceiling is top 5. I don't think his floor is as high as other potential top 5 running backs, because we've seen it at times where the Browns fall behind and are trailing. They will pull him off the field for Kareem Hunt to get him more going in the passing game.
I agree with all of that, and I do think he does have that top 5 upside. If I could ask for anything, it's that all the other coaches around the league look at what the Browns are doing and do that with their running back situations. You know, it's nice to be able to look at a backfield and say, you know what, there are two guys there, and both of them are great starts, and they're both viable, instead of us having these pull your hair out discussions about the Colts and Rams and Ravens and whomever else. But Nick Chubb still has plenty of opportunity. The Browns want to run the football primarily. The schedule is not terrible. It's actually pretty good. I've also, I talked about trading for DeAndre Swift. I've mentioned trading for Kareem Hunt as well, because that Browns schedule, I think, is very favorable down the stretch. So that does bode well for Nick Chubb. And as long as the game script doesn't turn, there's going to be chances for him to stay on the field and get plenty of touches. Okay, that was the best of the pack presented by Panini Trading Cards. Come back, wrap up the show by asking our resident nerd about some undrafted rookie free agents. Stay tuned for that on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. Time to wrap up the Friday show, as we always do, with a round of Ask a Nerd. We go to our resident nerd and friend Matt Okada, and this week we wanted to give the James Robinsons of the world a little bit of love, and we asked about some of the best fantasy seasons by undrafted rookie free agents. We'll see what Matt came up with.
Thanks, Marcus, and welcome in yet again to Ask a Nerd. This week going a little more historical, so strap yourselves in for at least a couple names you probably haven't heard, as we tackle the best rookie fantasy seasons by players that were never selected in the NFL Draft. First, a quick shout out to honorable mention James Robinson of the 2020 Jaguars, who needs only 18 fantasy points this season to crack the top 5. With nearly half the season left, Robinson is well on his way to one of the greatest undrafted rookie years of all time. Now back to the list, where we start with number 5, Giants receiver Bobby Johnson. Johnson snagged 48 catches for 795 yards and 7 TDs as an undrafted rookie in 1984, and even went on to win Super Bowl 21 with the squad 2 years later. Next on our list is number 4, Hall of Fame quarterback Warren Moon. In 84 with the Oilers, his first of 17 NFL seasons, Moon threw for over 3,000 passing yards and 12 touchdowns to score 180.6 fantasy points and become the first undrafted QB to break 150 as a rookie. As a note, the only other QB to do so ever is Jeff Garcia. The rest of our list is all running backs, starting with number 3, Clark Gaines of the Jets. In 1976, Gaines racked up 724 rushing yards, 400 receiving yards, and 5 TDs for a total of 183.4 fantasy points. Incredibly, Gaines' 400 yards through the air remain the most by an undrafted rookie running back to this day. At number 2 on our list is Colts 2001 signing Dominic Rhodes, who stepped up in relief of superstar RB Edgerrin James when James tore his ACL early in the season. Rhodes racked up an undrafted rookie record 1,104 rushing yards and added 9 scrimmage TDs plus a kick return score en route to 214.8 fantasy points. He would then spend the majority of his career backing up James and later Joseph Addai for the Colts. And at number 1, we have a recent addition to the Hall of Undrafted Stars, Philip Lindsay.
First down, Philip Lindsay back in. Lindsay waits, great patience. Lindsay cutting to the outside. He's got blazing speed, and he's gone. Touchdown, Broncos.
The Broncos back totaled 222.8 fantasy points in 2018 when he set the undrafted rookie record with 10 scrimmage touchdowns and added over 1,200 yards and 35 receptions. That's been Ask a Nerd, full of unheralded surprise stars. Hopefully your waiver wire additions can produce similar greatness in the playoff push. Until next time, may the fantasy points be with you.
Thank you, Matt. Always good stuff. And look, for me, anytime there's a list with Warren Moon, it can appear on this show. I was a huge Warren Moon fan as a kid, so always excited to see him getting in there. Some names I'd never heard of. I mean, Clark Gaines, Bobby Johnson, certainly was not familiar with them. But Florio, James Robinson is about 18 points away from cracking this list. He has been, for me at least, the biggest pleasant surprise of the fantasy season with how well he has done. So let's talk about him, though, in terms of Dynasty rookies and that sort of thing. If we were doing a rookie redraft in Dynasty, how high would you take him?
I think he has to go in the top 5, right? Like, he's on pace not to just surpass Philip Lindsay as the highest undrafted rookie he's going to shatter that record if he stays healthy and keeps up the production that he is doing right now. I think the only other rookie running back that we can even put in the same class as him right now is DeAndre Swift. Like, Jonathan Taylor has been a big bust. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it hasn't happened for him like we wanted. I think realistically it would be between Robinson, Swift, Justin Jefferson, and T. Higgins, and maybe you could throw Claypool in there. I think those would be the top 5 rookies if we got to redraft coming into 2020, these rookie dynasty drafts.
Yeah, you said top 5. I'm even thinking maybe top 3, and maybe this is just us being a little bit too hyped on him, but I sort of look at what they're building in Jacksonville as well. I know they're still trying to figure out their quarterback situation, but they've got some good skill position players between Robinson, Shenault, DJ Chark, even Keelan Cole. I think once they solve that quarterback piece, I think this offense has the potential to really take off down there in Jacksonville, and everything we've seen from James Robinson suggests he could be a big part of it going forward. But I thought that'd just be kind of an interesting, fun thought experiment considering how well he's played. I mean, look, Philip Lindsay has been great. James Robinson has been next level. Did you ever imagine that we'd be talking about him as a top 3 fantasy running back this year?
No, and that's what he is right now. It's wild how productive he has been. And it's funny because when Leonard Fournette was there, I was avoiding Leonard Fournette, and I don't think Leonard Fournette would be putting up these kinds of numbers. Like, I don't think if you just switched him, Leonard Fournette would be having James Robinson production. I think James Robinson is a good running back at the NFL level.
I really do too, and I'm very curious. And I've watched them here and there, but I would be curious to sort of take a deeper dive into his season once this is over and we have some more time to dig into the film a little bit, because it's been fun. It has been absolutely fun to watch, and this is part of the reason we watch football and why we play fantasy football as well. So, all right. That is it. We are done. We appreciate you hanging out with the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by DraftKings. You know the drill. Tell 2 friends to tell 2 friends. Rate, review, and remember, don't try this at home. Go to somebody else's house. Be safe. Take care of yourselves. Wear a mask. And we will see you on Monday.